Story number 1. I was hauling freight through a remote stretch of highway in the southeastern U.S., trying to make up for lost time. My delivery was running behind, and anyone who's worked in trucking knows you can't afford to be late. Rest stops and regulations be damned, I decided to push through the night. To stay awake, I'd been guzzling Coca-Cola like it was water, but after hours of driving, the caffeine and the urgency had caught up with me. I desperately needed to stop for a bathroom break. The highway was completely deserted. Not a single set of headlights in either direction for miles. There wasn't a rest stop or gas station anywhere nearby, so I reluctantly pulled over onto the shoulder of the dark highway. The engine rumbled as I left it running, throwing my rig into neutral and setting the parking brake. Grabbing my flashlight, I cracked open the driver's door, ready to step out. But something didn't sit right. The night was eerily quiet. Just the hum of my idling engine and the soft rustling of the wind through the surrounding trees. It was pitch black out there, the kind of darkness where your flashlight beam feels like it's cutting through water. As I zipped up and started heading back to the truck, I noticed something move out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was an animal, a deer, or maybe a coyote. But then it stepped out of the shadows and into the beam of my flashlight. It was a man. He was maybe in his late 30s or early 40s, wearing a tattered hoodie and jeans. His face looked gaunt, like he hadn't eaten in days. And his eyes had this wild, haunted look to them. But the thing that froze me in place was what he was holding. A gun. My heart started pounding. I was out there in the middle of nowhere, no cell service, no backup, and this guy had a weapon. He raised his free hand, palm out, like he was trying to show he wasn't a threat, but his voice was shaky and uneven when he spoke. "Please, don't be scared," he said. "I just need to talk to someone." I stayed quiet, my mind racing. Every instinct was screaming at me to get back in the cab and lock the doors, but something about him made me hesitate. He looked desperate. He started rambling, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I wasn't gonna hurt anyone, I swear. I've been out here all night, thinking about ending it. But then your truck pulled over. It felt like a sign, like God was telling me not to do it." He held up the gun, not pointing it at me, just holding it in his trembling hand. "I don't want this anymore," he said. "I don't want to feel like this." My throat was dry, but I managed to get out a few words. Okay, just let's put the gun down, all right?" He hesitated, looking at me like he was trying to decide if he could trust me. Then slowly, he knelt down and set the gun on the pavement. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and told him to stay put while I got on the CB radio. My phone had no signal out there, but thankfully, the radio crackled to life. I called for help, giving them our location as best I could. The man sat down on the edge of the road, his head in his hands. He started crying, big, heaving sobs that echoed in the quiet night. I stayed near the truck, keeping my distance but talking to him, telling him it was going to be okay, that he'd done the right thing by putting the gun down. It felt like hours before I saw the red and blue lights flashing in the distance. The police pulled up, and 2 officers got out, approaching cautiously. They disarmed him and started asking questions. Before they took him away, I walked up to him and put a hand on his shoulder. "You're still here for a reason," I said. "Don't waste." He nodded, tears streaming down his face, and then they put him in the back of the squad car. I climbed back into my truck, my hands still shaking as I gripped the wheel. I sat there for a while, staring out at the empty road, trying to process what had just happened. I never got his name, but I think about him sometimes. I wonder if he got the help he needed, if he's still out there somewhere. It's strange. Sometimes you pull over for something as simple as needing to pee, and it changes someone's life, maybe even saves it. Story number 2. I used to run long-haul freight routes through the southeastern U.S., mostly Georgia and Alabama, late at night when the roads were quiet and the air was heavy with humidity. One summer night, around 3 a.m., I was pushing through the back roads of Alabama, hauling a shipment of medical supplies that had to be delivered by sunrise. The route was remote. No streetlights, no cars, just endless dark highway winding through dense forest. I'd been driving for hours, running on caffeine and sheer determination, when I saw something up ahead on the side of the road. It was a bicycle. Lying on its side near the shoulder next to the bike, a man was sprawled out on the ground. He wasn't moving. At first, I thought it was an accident, a cyclist hit by a car or someone who'd collapsed from exhaustion. My gut told me to keep driving, but my conscience got the better of me. What if this guy was seriously hurt and I just left him there? I slowed my truck, pulling over a few feet ahead of the bike. The engine rumbled as I left it running, throwing my rig into neutral and setting the parking brake. Grabbing my flashlight, I cracked open the driver's door, ready to step out, but something didn't sit right. That's when I remembered a story another trucker had told me, a warning about setups on isolated roads. He'd said sometimes people fake accidents to lure drivers out of their cabs, and once you're out, their buddies come out of hiding to rob you, or worse. I hesitated, gripping the door handle. My gut screamed at me to leave, but it was already too late. A shadow shifted in the corner of my eye. Before I could react, a man appeared out of nowhere, right next to my driver's window. He was holding a gun, the barrel aimed directly at my head. "Get out!" he growled, his voice low and ice cold. My pulse thundered in my ears. My flashlight slipped out of my hand and clattered to the floor. For a split second, I froze, panic washing over me like a wave. Then somehow instinct kicked in. I slouched down in my seat as far as I could, almost like folding into myself. My foot found the gas pedal, and I stomped on it with everything I had. The truck roared to life, the engine snarling as it lurched forward. The man stumbled back and I heard a sharp crack, the gun going off. My driver's side mirror exploded in a shower of glass, but I didn't stop to check if he'd hit anything else. The truck surged ahead, tires screaming as they fought for traction on the asphalt in my side mirror. What was left of it? I saw the man and another figure standing by the bike, both of them watching as I barreled down the highway. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel, but I kept driving, not daring to stop until I hit a small truck stop an hour later. I checked the side of my cab and saw a bullet hole just under the window. If I hadn't ducked when I did, I wouldn't be here to tell this story. I called the police and told them what happened. They said they'd send a unit to check the area, but in a place that remote, I don't know if they ever found anything. To this day, I don't stop for anything or anyone on the road unless I'm 100% sure it's safe. That night, I learned the hard way that not every cry for help is what it seems, and that trusting your instincts can save your life. Story number 3. I pulled into a truck stop just outside of Knoxville late one evening, the kind of place that wasn't too big or too small, just a few dozen rigs scattered around, and the warm orange glow of overhead lights, keeping the lot from disappearing entirely into the night. I'd been driving for hours, and my eyes felt like they had sandpaper in them. I needed a break, and this place looked as good as any to park for a bit. As I found a spot near the back of the lot, I noticed a guy grilling by his truck. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then I realized I'd seen him before. Twice, in fact. Once at a truck stop in Nebraska, and again down in Louisiana. His name was Benny, or at least that's what he said last time we crossed paths. Friendly guy, always had a laugh and a story to share, and he had a knack for making himself at home no matter where he parked. I climbed out of my cab and gave him a wave. Benny grinned and waved me over. "Hey there, stranger," he called out. "Got some steaks on the grill. You hungry?" I was starving, and Benny's grill smelled like heaven. "You're a lifesaver," I said, grabbing a soda from my cooler and joining him. We chatted for a while, just the usual trucker talk, bad routes, crazy drivers, and the eternal quest for decent parking. A couple of other truckers wandered over, drawn by the smell of food, and soon we had a small group, sharing stories and jokes under the flickering light of the lot. That's when things got a little off. Two guys showed up out of nowhere, dressed a little too neatly for truckers, their eyes darting around like they were looking for something, or someone. They didn't say much at first, just stood at the edge of our little gathering, watching. Benny, always the hospitable type, called out to them. "You fellas hungry? Got room for 2 more steaks." The two men exchanged a glance before stepping closer. "We appreciate it," one of them said, his voice smooth but cold. They didn't introduce themselves, didn't ask for names or offer any conversation. They just stood there, eating, their eyes constantly scanning the parking lot like they were on edge. Something about them put me on edge too. Maybe it was the way they never really joined the group, like they were just pretending to fit in. Or maybe it was the way one of them kept glancing at Benny's truck, like he was sizing it up. I had an early haul the next morning, so after a bit, I made my excuses and headed back to my cab. Benny slapped me on the back and said, "Drive safe, buddy. I'll see you out there." As I climbed into my rig, I glanced back. Benny was still laughing and talking, his grill sending up smoke into the humid night air. The two strangers were still there too, standing a little too close to his truck now. Something didn't sit right with me, but I told myself I was just being paranoid. It wasn't my business, and I needed to sleep. I left just before sunrise, the parking lot still quiet. Benny's truck was there, the grill packed up, and I figured he was catching a few more hours of rest before hitting the road. I was halfway through my morning route when I heard the news on the radio. A trucker had gone missing overnight. His truck was still sitting in the parking lot, untouched, but there was no sign of him anywhere. My stomach dropped. I pulled over at the next rest area and checked my phone. Sure enough, there was a picture of Benny's truck plastered on every news site I could find. Same make, same model, even the same faded company logo on the side. I called the police and told them everything I could remember. The two strangers, the grilling, the way they'd acted around Benny. The officer on the other end thanked me, but I could tell they didn't have much to go on. Weeks passed, and Benny never turned up. His truck was eventually towed, and the lot went back to being just another stop on the road. I still think about him every time I pull into a lot late at night. I think about how easily I could have stayed longer, or spoken up, or maybe even warned him about the way those strangers were acting. But most of all, I think about the last thing he said to me, just before I left. "See you out there." I never did. Thank you for joining me on this chilling journey. If you enjoyed the darkness, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more haunting tales. Until next time, stay safe and stay in the light.